Hi, and welcome to Crafts with Ash DIY and Decor. My name is Ashley, and today I'm going to bring you my top 10 favorite Christmas DIYs for a fun compilation video for Christmas in July. So stay tuned if you are ready for some holiday fun. First, if you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Click that drop-down menu and the bell so you're notified anytime I upload a new video. I upload videos a few times a month, and of course, coming into the fall and holiday season, I have a lot of fun ideas that I know you're not going to want to miss. All right, so let's get into these DIYs from 2021 that I think you're really going to enjoy now. For my next DIY, I'm going to start off with this circle sign from the Dollar Tree, and by using my hairdryer and a scraper, I'm going to take 1,000 years to scrape this sticker off of the back. Once my back was clean, I sanded it down just a little bit to get off any of the glue residue, and now I'm going to give this a good coat of Waverly chalk paint in white. After that, I'm going to take one of the brand new Farmhouse 2022 calendars that I got from the Dollar Tree, and if you have been in the crafting community for a while, you know that these are hard to get your hands on, but if you do, you are so excited. These are so popular because look at the amazing graphics and the pictures in these calendars. They are amazing, and a lot of crafters love making DIYs with them because they are farmhouse and they're rustic and they fit right in to their decor, and it's just gorgeous. So I, of course, am going to use the December page that has this little mason jar, and it says Merry Christmas with some Christmas picks and florals. So I ripped it out of the calendar, and I am going to Mod Podge it down on that board. Now, the reason why I painted it white was because I didn't want any of the darker MDF color to come through. So I'm just going to apply a really even coat of Mod Podge on my circle, and then I'm going to very carefully put my calendar page on top. Now, these calendar pages are very, very thin, so in my experience, it's nearly impossible to not get wrinkles, but just do the best you can. I mean, just pull it as tight as you can without ripping it. I'm going to use my brayer tool to go ahead and help me flatten it down and get out as many wrinkles as I can, but just be very careful because these are very thin and they can rip easily. So I'm just using that brayer to flatten it down. And just as a side note, if you ever see any supplies that I'm using, like the miter shears or this brayer, check my description box below because I do have links to all of those really neat tools that you can go ahead and check out and get yourself one if you would like. So all of those are in my description box. So after I have that glued down, I just took a pair of scissors and I'm cutting off the excess paper, and then I'm going to take my sanding sponge and I'm going to sand around my circle to give it that nice clean edge. Now, when you do this, please again be very careful because this paper is thin, and you want to also sand in the down direction, but that's going to give you that nice clean finish. After my board was all sanded down, I went over the paper one more time with some Mod Podge so I could protect the paper and also seal it in. Next, I decided I wanted it to be a little bit more distressed, so I took my chippy brush and that Waverly Antique Wax, and I'm just dry brushing over the image. Now, if you like it as it is, absolutely keep it. You do not have to do this step. I just wanted to make it a little bit darker. After that, I took some twine and I'm wrapping a piece of it around my fingers several times, 4 of my fingers, several times, and because I'm going to make a bow. Next, I'm going to cut a longer piece and I'm going to double it up to make the tails. But first I'm going to cut a short piece to go ahead and tie it in the middle. That way it actually creates the bow. And then this is where I'm going to take the longer piece, double it up, and then I'm going to tie it around the middle, making sure that both of my ends are even. And then one side is a loop, so I do cut that, so that way it's just two separate pieces. And then I'm going to kind of fluff it up and hot glue it on the top of my mason jar. After that, I'm going to take more of this baking sheet and I'm going to cut a small piece down to fit on top of my circle. Now I am making sure to round out the edges because I want to make this whole thing look like an ornament, like a bulb. So I am rounding it out because this is going to be that silver part. Next, I'm applying a good amount of hot glue towards the top. Then I'm just going to push that on there. After that, I'm going to distress this a little bit by again using my Waverly Antique Wax and my chippy brush, and I'm just going to dry brush over the silver part, but I am going to go a little darker around the edges. After that, I'm going to take this floral wire and I'm going to cut off a smaller piece. Then I'm going to wrap it in that baking sheet. Now it is easy to wrap because the baking sheet is kind of flimsy, so it's nice. So it is easy to wrap and you just need a very small piece to wrap it, but I'm going to use this to make that ring. Now of course I would have preferred an actual silver ring up top, and you'll see what I mean in a second, but I didn't have any, so I just had to use what I had on hand, and this was the best I could come up with, and I still think it looked really cute. So I just wrapped that entire thing in the baking sheet, and now I'm curving it. I'm making it into a circle, and then I'm going to flip over my sign and use a generous amount of hot glue and hot glue my little wire up to the top to make it look like an ornament hanger. Then again, I'm going to take my duct tape and I'm going to tape it down just to give it an extra hold. Now, I did notice though that when I was taking pictures, it kind of started to slip out. So you may want to use E6000 or a super glue to glue that just to give it a even stronger hold. Next, I just dry brushed over that with that Waverly Antique Wax. Then I kind of thought that it was missing something, so there are berries in the image, so my mom actually thought of this idea to add some berries on top of my ribbon or my bow. So I'm cutting out the little berries from it, and then I'm just going to hot glue those on either side of the middle part of my bow. Then I'm going to take a small pine cone that I got from this little pack of pine cones from the Dollar Tree, and oddly enough I actually picked this pack up in the springtime, and they said that they're pumpkin scented, so I didn't really smell them that much, but I guess they're supposed to smell like pumpkins. And I hot glued that in the middle of my berries, and I thought that was so cute because there are pine cones in that image as well. Then to finish this off, I cut off a piece of twine. I'm doubling it up, and then I'm going to loop it through my piece of wire, tie a knot at the top, cut off the excess, and now I have the hanger for my little ornament. I love how this came out. It is a great use of the calendar, and I was so excited to use the calendar, of course, and I think it's so rustic and so cute. What do you think? For my my last DIY, I'm going to use this rectangle sign that I got from the Dollar Tree around Easter time, but of course they have these all year round through the different seasons, so you can choose any one, it doesn't matter. And the first thing I'm going to do is take off the twine hanger. Then I'm going to flip it over, and by using my Dollar Tree spackle, I'm going to fill the holes. Then once my spackle is dry, I'm going to sand off the excess so that way it's ready for me to paint. Next, I'm going to give this board 2 coats of Waverly chalk paint in the color white. Once my board was dry, I'm going to flip it so it's vertical. Then I'm going to take a ruler and put it in the middle of my board. I'm going to use a pencil to trace the line on the top and the bottom, and then I'm going to continue drawing lines going down but I am lining up the top with the line above it. After I get to the bottom, I switch and do the same thing on the top, so I have lines going all the way down my board. Then to make this look even more like shiplap, I'm going to take my finger and just rub it along my pencil lines to give it that shadowing. I have really been loving using this technique lately, and I think that this is the perfect technique to use to give it that shiplap look, and I've used a bunch of different methods, but this is definitely the one. After that, I took my chippy brush and Waverly Antique Wax, and I'm just dry brushing over my board, and I am paying attention to the edges because I wanted to highlight those, so I made them just a little bit darker, but I just distressed my entire board. Then I gave that a nice good sanding so everything, all of the paints all blended in. Next, I took this pack of metal stars. Now I do not end up using this star, but I'm just using this as a placeholder because I am planning to put a star on top of the board. And I'm going to take this garland and I am going to line it up. I'm going to have a little piece at the top, and it's going to be narrow. Then I'm just going to go back and forth and just make it like a wavy shape, topsy-turvy shape, I guess. And then I'm going to give this a haircut, just like that other DIY. So I'm trimming this all down. Now, of course, ideally I'd rather do this over a trash can, and that's going to be my advice for you, to do it over a trash can. But if not, I have my handy dandy ladybug to vacuum it all up. After it's all trimmed down, I am going to take this string of lights, the fairy lights that I got from the Dollar Tree, and this is actually the copper wire. I didn't realize that, but it actually ended up looking really cute. And what I'm going to do is use my crocodile, and this is like a big hole punch, but it punches through wood and metal and all kinds of different materials, and I'm just going to punch a hole at the top of my board. And then starting from the back of my board, I'm going to string the lights all the way through. After that, I'm going to wrap my fairy lights around my garland. I'm going to go all the way down, and then I had some left over, so I wrapped it right back up. Next, I'm going to take this berry garland, and I'm going to start at the top of my green garland, and I'm going to wrap that going all the way down. Next, I'm going to start hot gluing my tree to the board. So I start at the very tippy top, and then I again just kind of create that very wavy pattern. So I'm going to kind of bounce it out to the right and then to the left, but I am starting small and then getting wider as I go down. I just wanted this to be kind of whimsical and fun, and this kind of actually reminded me of the Whoville tree from How the Grinch Stole Christmas, but my daughter absolutely loves the Grinch, so I think this is going to fit right into our home decor, but I thought that this was kind of fun. So I did have to put a generous amount of hot glue down on every part, and I'm only gluing on the ends, or like at every wraparound, if that makes sense, so every curve, but I am just doing my best to hold it there until the glue kind of sets up a little bit. And I did find that that did help. So I just hot glued until the garland was all used up. And you can see how it's kind of forming the shape of a tree. And I just think this is so cute. But you can see there that I am holding it down so that way the glue can set. So after I have it all glued down, I'm going through and kind of reinforcing some parts. And then I'm going to go through and trim it up just a little bit more for any long little pieces that I missed. That way it doesn't look so crazy and it looks a little cleaner. Now for my star, I decided to use one of these little metal stars off of that USA sign from 4th of July. And I decided that I'm going to hot glue it down on top of the hole that I had to make. So I really liked that because it hid the hole, but it also let us see the top of the tree. Next, I'm going to take a jumbo craft stick and I'm going to cut a little rectangular piece so it is the trunk of our tree, and I'm going to stain this with the Waverly Antique Wax. After that, I'm going to hot glue it down to the bottom of my tree. Next, I wanted the star to match a little better with the rest of the tree, and I just felt like the silver was just not, it just didn't look right. So I decided to kind of pounce on some of that Waverly Antique Wax to make it more of a copper. Then I flipped my sign over and I added some batteries to the battery box. This does take 2 AA batteries, and I thought that when this thing lit up, it really brought it to life. Then I'm going to pull my battery box all the way down, and I'm going to hot glue it to the side of my board. Now you want to make sure that you hot glue it screw side up so you can change the batteries, and I also made sure to have the little on-off button facing up as well. Then to complete this, I'm going to add a hanger. So I took some of this nautical rope, I tied a knot, and then hot glued the knot down on one of the sides of my board, and then I'm going to do the same thing. Then I'm going to cut off the excess rope on either side. I love this piece. I think it's so different, it's whimsical, and so much fun. And like I said, when this is lit up, I really do think that it completes it and it gave it that final touch that it absolutely needed. And I just think it's so festive. What do you think? I had one of these little rocket shooters left over from one of my 4th of July crafts, so I just took off the yellow pieces and that little rubber band on the top. Then I took this peppermint themed scrapbook paper, and all of my scrapbook paper today came from Hobby Lobby recently, so you know that it's in stock. So all I did was measure it out so it would wrap around that little foam rocket. Then I cut out my piece, and by using hot glue, I simply glued it on to start making it look like the North Pole pole. Now, if you can't find these little foam pieces at the Dollar Tree anymore because summer's pretty much over, you can also use a dowel rod, or you can cut up a plunger stick to wrap this paper around as well. There's so many different ideas you can do to still achieve this look. So I wanted to make sure that all of the ends were hot glued down, and then I trimmed off the edges of my pole. That way it would stand up flat and paper wasn't hanging over. Real quick, I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, thank you so much for stopping by. I really hope that you love what you see today and choose to stick around by subscribing to my channel. I am almost to 7,000 subscribers, and I would love for you to help me out by becoming one of them. If you're returning, thank you so much for all of your support and for choosing to come back today. I hope you're a subscriber as well, and don't forget to give this video a like if you're loving what you see. All right, back to the DIY. So after I had both of my ends cut out, I simply took one of these little styrofoam balls and I hot glued it to the top to make the top of my pole. Now, I wanted to actually put some glitter on this, but I didn't have the right color, so I do plan on adding it, but for now, this is how it's going to look. Next, I took this little dowel rod and I used my miter shears to cut it in half just to make it a little shorter. After that, I took my Waverly chalk paint in white and painted my dowel rod. Once my dowel rod was dry, I took a pair of scissors and poked a hole in my paper, and then I pushed the dowel rod inside my pole. Next, I took this little tag that I got from the Dollar Tree and I cut off where the hole was, and now I'm going to cut down my dowel rod just a little bit because it was a little too long, but I had to make sure that it was going to be long enough to hold my little sign. After that, I took these red letters from the Dollar Tree and I spelled out North Pole. To add some detail to my sign, I took my white chalk marker and I drew lines and dots around the perimeter. Then, to protect my stickers, I went ahead and put on a layer of Mod Podge. Once the Mod Podge was dry, I took my Crop-A-Dile and I punched 2 holes at the top of my sign. After that, I took some of this red and white twine. Now, this actually came off ribbon with burlap, so I am just pulling off the burlap part, and then I'm going to loop it through one of my holes, and then I'm going to cut off another piece and do the same. Once both of my pieces of string were looped through, I went ahead and tied them both to my wooden dowel rod. I did make sure that the knots were towards the back of my sign, and then I tacked them down with some hot glue. I also made sure that these were tied really tight. Then I just cut off the extra twine. Finally, I took this little foam ball that I had from Valentine's Day, and if you don't have these, you can just use a wooden bead, and I glued it to the end of my dowel rod. Then, to help this stand, I actually had this stand left over from another DIY, and so I just painted it black. Now, you can also construct that with some tumbling tower pieces. Once it was dry, I simply applied a generous amount of hot glue to the bottom of my pole, and now I have this super cute North Pole sign. For the next DIY, I'm going to take this little floral disc and I'm simply going to paint it in a few coats of white Waverly chalk paint. Now, after I painted the first coat, I did decide to take some Dollar Tree spackling and fill in that hole. Now, you could kind of probably skip this step because we're going to be covering this anyways, but at this point, I thought I was going to paint it, but then I changed my mind. After that, I sanded it down and then proceeded to paint one more coat of that Waverly chalk paint on that disc. Once that dried, I took this music sheet scrapbook paper, again from Hobby Lobby, and I traced my circle around it and then cut it out. Then, by using a good amount of Mod Podge, I applied a nice even coat and glued my piece of paper down on my disc. Then, to get rid of any of the paper that was hanging over, I took my sanding block and I sanded in the down direction, and that helped me to get a nice clean edge. After that, I took this little vine garland that I got from Hobby Lobby, and I had taken this off another project, so it was kind of big, so I just took it apart and then I made it a smaller wreath, and I just wrapped it around each other until I got the size I needed. Once I had the wreath in the form that I liked, I went ahead and hot glued it to the center of my little disc. After that, I took this little berry garland that I've actually had left over from Valentine's Day, and I just cut off some of the berries and randomly hot glued them around my wreath. Next, I took some pine cones off of another DIY that I had and stuck that at the top of my wreath. And then I'm going to take this solid red ribbon and just tie a simple shoelace bow. Then I'm going to glue that on the top of my pine cones. Next, I took this leftover bell that I had from a wind chime from the Dollar Tree, and the first thing I did was take out the little stick in the center, and it was easy. I just had to pry open the little loops in the middle, and then I could easily get it out. But This is exactly why you want to save stuff like this, because I have a ton of these because I did all of those metal flower DIYs and bells came on each of them. So I saved all of them and now look, it's coming in handy. So by using some super glue and some hot glue, I'm going to glue it right on top of my little disc to make it look like an ornament. Now you do have to hold it on top for several minutes until the glue sets up. After it sets up, you can go ahead and release it, and then I just cleaned it up a little bit, and I did hit the sides of my disc again with that white paint. After that, I took off the chain on the top, and then by using my chippy brush and my Waverly Antique Wax, I distressed the edges of my little ornament. Now, I love the rustic look. If you don't like the rustic look, you can absolutely skip this step. It's totally up to you and what you love and what makes your heart happy. But for Christmas, I do go the rustic route. So after that, I took a piece of twine and I'm simply going to tie it through the little loop at the top of my ornament and then tie a knot. Now, I'm not actually using this as an ornament. Again, this is some tiered tray decor. So I took three of those little wooden blocks from the Dollar Tree. I glued two on top of each other, and then I glued it to the back of my disc and then glued one right next to it, as you see. Now I did glue my little ornament so it stood at an angle because I just thought it looked cuter like that. And now I have this really cute Christmas ornament stand up sign for my tiered tray. I am going to use this little truck, and when I saw it in the Crafter's Square at Dollar Tree, I squealed out loud. It is a 3D truck, and how cute is this? The possibilities are endless. So of course, I had to do the traditional little red truck. So the first thing I did was give this a coat of crimson Waverly chalk paint, and whatever I do to the front, I also did to the back, but I'm just going to show you the front. After my red paint was dry, I took some black acrylic paint and just painted in my tires. Next, I took a baby wipe and I dipped it in some Waverly Antique Wax, and I used that to faux stain the grates, I guess it would be called, of my truck. Next, to give this just a little bit more detail, I took my black paint pen and I traced around all of those open areas of the truck. I just wanted to highlight those a little bit more. Next, I took this scrapbook paper that I got from Hobby Lobby and I cut out that little tree. I loved this scrapbook paper because it had a lot of Christmas themed words and graphics on it that you can use to Mod Podge onto projects, and you're going to see that the last project I actually do that too. So I just cut it out, and I did cut off the little base because I didn't really want it to look like a decorated Christmas tree. I just wanted it to look like a tree. So I cut around it so none of the white color was showing. It was just a black tree. And then I'm going to use my Mod Podge to glue that to the front of my truck on the door. Now, I did decide just to put a coat of Mod Podge over the entire thing to protect all of my paint. Once that was drying, I took this little tree that I had left over from Christmas last year, and I just kind of gave it a little haircut because it was actually missing the top of it. So I cut this down to make it look more pointed at the top, and then I'm simply just going to push that inside of my truck. After that, I took the paintbrush that had some white paint on it, and I just dabbed it on the branches of my tree so I could fill it out more with that snowy effect. Now, I purposely did not glue it in there because actually it just kind of stuck, but I'm glad I didn't because then I decided to paint the inside of my truck with red paint because I noticed that you obviously can see that it's still that natural color. Once that was dry, I took my chippy brush again and my Waverly Antique Wax, and I just distressed the front of my truck. Again, if you don't want that look, you absolutely don't have to do it. To finish it off, I stuck my tree in, and how cute is this? For our last DIY, I took this Home Sweet Home sign that I actually got at Dollar General, and as you can see, some of the roof had actually broken off, so I'm just using my scraper to go ahead and get off the rest of the roof, and then I'm going to replace it. Next, I'm going to take this scrapbook paper that I got from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to trace my house on the paper, and then I'm going to cut it out. After that, I'm going to take some Mod Podge and glue my paper onto my house. Then to remove any of the paper that was hanging over, I took my sandpaper and I sanded in the down direction to again give me that nice clean edge. After I was done with that, I did decide to paint the edges around my house with the white Waverly chalk paint. Of course, if I thought to do this earlier, I would have done it before I glued my paper on it, but actually it ended up looking okay if some of the white paint got on the front because it kind of looked like snow, and we're going to add even more snow detail to this soon. So after my white paint dried, I took these blocks that I got from the Dollar Tree and I glued a bunch of them going down my house to create a roof. Now, I purposely had them hanging over the front just a little bit. That way it did look like a roof. Then I added one to the top to create the point and then went down the other direction. After that, I painted my roof with the white Waverly chalk paint. Now, I also took my white paint and I painted on the scrapbook paper a little bit up at the point of my house, right underneath the roof, to again give it that snowy look. And then I dry brushed a little bit of that white paint at the bottom so it looked like there was snow at the bottom of the house as well. Next, I'm going to take that piece of scrapbook paper that has all of those Christmas words on it, and there's one little section that says, "'Twas the night before Christmas and all through the house." And I'm going to cut that out, and it's that whole thing, and it was just a little too long. So I cut in between the two verses and then trimmed it down a little bit, and then by using my Mod Podge, I'm going to glue these two little pieces of paper right on the front. Next, I took a little piece of garland that I had left over from last year and I made a circle with it because I'm going to make a little wreath. Now, this was kind of wild and crazy, so I decided to give it a haircut so that way it looked a little cleaner. And I really trimmed it down, and you're going to see how much of a difference that made. After that, I'm going to form it into a shape of a circle, and I am going to tack down the ends with some hot glue, and then I'm going to glue my little wreath at the point of my house on the roof. Now, before I glued it down, I actually took my brush with the white paint, and I just kind of dabbed it over to give it that flocked snow look. Next, I took some of those berries off of that berry garland again, and I just randomly placed them around my wreath. Now, to make this even look more like snow, I laid down some hot glue and then I sprinkled some Epsom salt that I got at the Dollar Tree all over the roof of my house. I put the salt on the front of the roof and then on the top, and then I actually added some to the bottom as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope you got some fun inspiration and ideas for Christmas in July. Until I see you again, I'll craft with you soon. And I hot glued it right to the top of my wreath. And that was it. That completed this cute little house. So for this first dupe, I'm going to start off with this family box sign. And this is just me being picky here. You don't really have to do this if you don't want to, but what I want to do is remove the staples and then glue the box back together, just simply so the staples weren't there. So I used literally every tool I own to go ahead and try to pry up those staples. Of course, I couldn't find my needle nose pliers, which would have been the correct tool, but hey, you do what you got to do, right? So finally, I just took my little scraper and I popped it underneath, and then I just went around the entire under, like the top part, and I just pried the top off of it. And then I kind of used different tools to go ahead and get those staples out. So I'm just going to go around, get every single one of those out. And like I said, you could skip this step if you wanted to. This is just kind of me being picky, I guess. So as you can see, the one end of the box fell off, so I'm going to kind of sand that down, and then I will re-glue all of it back together. So now I'm able to pop the back off, and then that pink plaid paper there, that actually just slides right out. So I'm just going to remove that. And then I'm going to take out the staples that are left in those little pieces there. And I'm just going to simply pull those out. And then I'm going to start hot gluing this box back together. So even though this looks complicated, it really isn't. I just needed to take all these pieces off so that way I could basically reconstruct it. So I just used hot glue and glued each piece back on the board, but as you can see, I actually did it tag side up now, so that way the tag was on the inside of my box and not facing up, because we're going to use the box part, like like as a, I guess, a little stand. And then I'm just going to hot glue this second side down. Now you do want to make sure there's like brown finish on one side and not on the other. It's just the MDF board. So I did have to make sure that the brown finish was facing out. And then I'm going to add my last piece here. And for some reason I did not glue it perfectly back together, but whatever, it was good enough. All right, next I'm going to take my nutmeg apple barrel paint, and I'm just going to paint this entire thing. I'm going to get the top, the sides, and you can see that there's still holes from the staples. That actually kind of worked into my design here. I wanted to paint this to look like wood, and they kind of looked like notches that would be in wood. So I actually really liked how that came out. So like I said, I'm going to paint the entire thing. All right, next I'm going to take these letters that I got from Walmart, and you only need a J and a Y. I bet you know what we're going to spell. So they are wrapped, so I did have to remove the plastic, and then I'm going to paint each one of them with my crimson chalk paint from Waverly. Now, I also, on these, made sure to paint the sides of the letters as well, and I only did one coat. That seemed to cover it really well. And again, you want to get all of the sides, the insides, the tops. Just make sure it's completely covered. You don't have to worry about the back. Although you might want to worry about the back, depending on where you're going to display this, and that'll make more sense in a minute. So while those letters were drying, I took these 3 candle holders that I got from the Dollar Tree, and as you can see, there are images on it. So I just took some 100% acetone and a paper towel and wiped it off, and this worked like a charm. It came completely off. As you can see, it's totally getting rid of all of of the lettering and the pictures on these glass little votives. And I got these ones because I couldn't find clear glass ones. Obviously, if you can find clear ones, you want to get those, but I couldn't find it. But hey, this worked perfectly. So this saved me from having to go to $1,000 trees to find them. All right, so next we're going to assemble our little piece here. So I did line up all 3 of my little votives, and what I'm going to do is simply hot glue the letter in front of the votive. So I'm going to put 1 letter on each. So I'm going to do the J on the first one, and then of course do the Y on the last one. And I am hot gluing at the bottom and then wherever it touches at the top too. Then for my O, I'm going to use a little strip of garland that I had left over from last year, and I'm going to give it a little haircut so it's not so crazy and wild. So right here, I'm doing it under the camera, and then in a second, I'm going to move it over my trash can. And then once it is all cleaned up, I'm going to twist it in an O, and I just twisted the ends around itself. And then I'm going to hot glue that in front of the middle votive. Now, I totally meant to take off the tags or the stickers underneath each votive, and I'll go back and do that, but you might want to, you might want to do that too, because you can see them. So I did have to hold these pieces there for a minute while they dried, but this hot glue worked great with glass. And then I just made a little red bow with some little red ribbon that I had and put that at the top of my garland wreath. Okay, so I apologize, but I kind of lost footage here. I didn't realize I wasn't recording, but I'm just showing you how I distressed this to look like wood. So what I did was I dry brushed some ivory chalk paint over it, then I went over it again with the nutmeg, and then I added some darker streaks with the Waverly Antique Wax. So now I'm going to use that ivory to distress the letters. Now you'll see in the Kirkland's piece, they are just bright red, but of course you know me, I have to have some rustic touches. So I did just decide to brush over these letters with that ivory chalk paint. So I really love the little touch that added. I thought that it made, oh my gosh, I thought that made this piece look amazing, and distressing that board too. And then once that was done, our little piece was complete. Woo. All right, now here's the Kirkland's piece. They're selling it for $16.99. Not bad. That's what it looks like, and I love it, but I totally thought I could dupe it when I saw it. So what do you think? This next DIY is really easy. So I'm starting off with one of these fall square signs from the Dollar Tree. Now, ideally, I would have liked a rectangular sign. I just don't have any. I'm going to have to remember to get some when I see them. But this one will work too. But the Kirkland's original piece is a rectangle, I believe. But this worked out just fine. So I went ahead and pulled out the hanger on the back. And then I pulled off the staple, sanded it down. And now I'm going to apply a good layer of Mod Podge all over the back of my sign. Now, technically, this could be a reversible sign because on the other side, there was a Thanksgiving like saying or whatever, and then this is going to be Christmas. So really, you could use it for both. And now, once I have my good layer of Mod Podge on, I'm going to take this peppermint striped paper, and this came from Hobby Lobby. You're going to see me use this paper a lot this year, because my stockings actually match this paper. So I'm going to make decor to match, my stockings, and it's also my Christmas skirt too, tree skirt. So yeah, you're going to see me use that a lot. So after I pushed it all down, make sure it was all adhered, I went ahead and trimmed around the edges, and I'm just giving it a rough cut. If I'm not getting super, super close to the edge, that's okay. I'm just making sure that I cut the excess down, and then I'm going to take my sanding block and I'm going to sand in the down direction around all of the edges to go ahead and give it that nice clean cut. All right, so after my board was sanded down, I'm going to take this printable that I just Googled Joy to the World sheet music on Google, and I just printed it off, and now I'm going to use my paper cutter or my paper trimmer to trim it down. I don't want like the white border showing, so I need to make it a little smaller. And then I am going to go ahead and actually cut off the title of the song too. And what's really neat is the words are on the sheet music obviously too, so you'll know what song it is. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this down. Next, I'm going to take a piece of green cardstock and I'm going to put it in the corner, but I'm going to place it so there is a border around it. And then I'm going to apply a good layer of Mod Podge to the back of my sheet music. And then I'm going to press it down again in the corner, leaving a border around that one corner around it. And then I'm going to take my paper cutter and cut off the other sides, leaving the border. Now you're going to see in the Kirkland's piece, my design or my scrapbook paper is completely different than what you'll see, but the concept is still the same. Theirs is buffalo check, black and white buffalo check. I'm not really a black and white buffalo check girl, so that's why I'm using paper that I, actually like and will actually display in my home. So that's the beauty about doing these dupes, is you can create them to match your style. So now I'm going to put a nice layer of Mod Podge on the back of the green paper. And then I'm going to place that in the middle of my board. And I do want to make sure that all the sides are pressed down, so I'm going to go through, or glued down. So I'm going to go through and just kind of apply Mod Podge where I need it. Then after that, I made this decal on my Cricut. It says "Joy to the World." So I'm just going to simply place that in the middle of my sign. And then I'm going to scrape it on there using my little tool. And then off camera, I did add a hanger using the nautical rope. I did that as an afterthought because I thought that I should probably add a hanger to it. But I thought this came out super cute. So here's the Kirkland's piece, $79.99. And again, they use the buffalo check and the red, but the concept is pretty much the same. But you tell me, what do you think? For my third dupe, I'm going to be using these color your own little trees that come in a pack for kids to do, but we can use them too. And I'm going to use 2 of them for this project. So the first thing I need to do is I need to add like a little trunk to each one of these trees. So to do this, I'm going to use a jumbo craft stick that I picked up in a pack from Walmart. And I'm going to cut 2 of them down, or cut 2 pieces, and then I'm going to sand them down to just kind of make them a little bit more straight. And now I do want both of my trunks to be different sizes because I want the one tree to be taller than the other. So once I have my piece cut out, I'm going to use some hot glue and hot glue it right underneath the tree, right to the bottom of the tree. So as you can see, I'm cutting the other one a little shorter, and then I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to hot glue that one to the bottom of the tree. Now for this DIY, I'm going to be actually using the back of these trees, so I'm not going to use that side, but I am going to put hot glue around the back too, and then I just felt like it needed a little bit more support. So I'm cutting 2 little pieces off of the jumbo popsicle stick, and then I'm going to hot glue that over the tree and the trunk on the back just to hold it a little better. And that seemed to work. They are still standing. So that's good news. All right, so next I'm going to take this Christmas plaid Christmas paper, scrapbook paper, and I'm going to trace one of the trees on the paper, and then I'm going to cut it out. Now, I'm going to do this to both. I'm going to use 2 different types of scrapbook paper, but I'm only going to show you one because what I do to one, I do to the other. So I'm not going to bore you with showing you how I cut, Christmas trees out of paper. All right, so this is the second piece. So I've already cut that one out. Now I'm going to use my Mod Podge again, and I'm just going to apply a good coat to my tree. And then I'm going to cover this with the scrapbook paper, and as you can see, I also cut out the stem as well, or the trunk as well of the tree. So I'm just going to make sure to push it on really well, get all the edges so nothing flaps up or comes off. And then I'm going to do the same thing to the other one as well. So again, I'm just going to apply a nice coat of Mod Podge. And then stick my scrapbook paper on. Now, once they're both glued down, I'm going to take a nail file and I'm going to use that to sand off the excess paper. This nail file worked perfectly because there's a lot of little spaces that my sanding block would not be able to get into. So I love using a nail file for situations like this where there's just little areas or tight spaces. And this worked out great. So I'm going to go ahead and sand this down. And then I'm going to also sand the other one down as well. Next, I'm going to take my Waverly Antique Wax, and by using a makeup sponge, I'm going to go around the edges of the trees because there's wood showing, and I'm going to rub some antique wax, and I'm also going to brush some onto the front a little bit as well. You can see I'm kind of going on the tips of the tree and then going around the bottom of it and then the top, the star. So I'm just going around the perimeter of the entire tree, and I'm going to do this to both as well. And then I am going to go a little bit on the inside too. I really wanted these to look rustic. And I do think that they turned out rustic too. All right, so after that, I need a stand. So I had this stand left over. These were from some pumpkins for fall time, and I took one and cut it in half. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of glue in there. So what I did was I took my hair dryer to heat up that glue, and then I just used different tools to just basically get the glue out of there, just to pick it all out. So what I'm trying to do is just clean that up a little bit before I actually put the trees into the stands. And I'm going to do that with both stands, of course. All right, so after that's done, it's time to hot glue our tree into the stand. So I put some hot glue at the bottom of the trunk and then some on the back and the front where the trunk meets the stand, or it goes into the stand. Now, if you don't have these stands, you can use a couple tumbling tower blocks, glue them together, paint them brown, and use those. Those would work perfectly. If I didn't have these, that's what I would have done. So as I'm looking at these, I'm like, one is not, like the difference in height was not as much as I wanted. So I went ahead and took the red tree off the stand and I cut that stem or the trunk, down a little bit. And I liked that a lot better. And then I went ahead and just hot glued it back into my stand. So now there's a major height difference and I love that. All right, so now I'm going to take two of these little wooden stars that I got in a pack from Dollar Tree this year. I was so happy to see these. And I'm just going to faux stain these by using a baby wipe and dipping it in my Waverly Antique Wax and just rubbing it all over my stars. I believe in the Kirklands, it was like a blue and a gray and a red color scheme. But again, I added my own touch on this because I wanted this to match the decor in my home. So I'm going to go ahead and rub that Waverly chalk paint all over, and I did make sure to get the sides as well. And then I decided I don't really want that star on the top of the tree, so I just used my scissors and cut the top at a point at the top of the tree, and that worked out perfectly. Then I did take my Waverly Antique Wax and hit the sides of those. And then I'm just going to simply hot glue my star on the top of the tree. So cute. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the other tree as well. So I'm going to cut the top to a point. And it doesn't have to be perfect because the star actually covers it. And then I'm going to sand it down a little bit. Now I did forget to go over the sides of that one with the antique wax. But then I just hot glued the star on top. All right, next I'm going to take my big supply of these colored round beads from the Dollar Tree, and I'm picking out all of the red ones and pink ones, and I am making sure to get a bunch of different sizes of these too. Then you'll see that I actually have to resort to some orange and yellow because I didn't have enough, but I did 17 of these. 17 of these beads. After they were all on my skewer, and I put these on the skewer because I thought that maybe it would be easier to paint them. So I'm going to take my crimson paint and I'm going to paint over all these. Now you're probably thinking, Ash, why are you painting these? They're already red. I didn't really like the shiny red and they were kind of too bright, but I really like the crimson red. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint all of these beads. And like I said, I definitely wanted to get different sizes of the beads as well. So I'm going to make sure that they are fully covered. Next, of course, you know I got to antique them. So I took that makeup sponge and I'm going to brush that Waverly Antique Wax all over my beads to give it that little rustic touch. Then I'm going to take them off of my little skewer, and I'm going to take some twine, and I did add some hot glue to the end of it to kind of make it, you know, bring it to a point. And I'm going to just start threading all of my beads on that twine. So we need 2 different strands of beads here. I believe there's 7 on one and 10 on the other. I'm not entirely sure, but it just depends on which wood trees you use too. So I am going to thread these on, and what I'm doing as I'm threading them is I'm making sure to put different sizes next to each other. And then I'm going to test it. So where these beads are going to go, they're going to hang underneath that first little like flap out, I guess. So I'm just making sure that there's enough to cover the front. Then I'm going to tie a few knots, 2 knots on top of each other. Push my beads down to the knot, and you can see that that's going to cover it. Then I'm going to cut the other end, tie my knots. Then I'm going to hot glue the twine to the back of my tree. So that way the beads hang around the front. Now here's a trick to this. You don't want to put your knots right next to the beads. You want to make sure to give it a little slack for when you bring the twine around the back. So then I'm just going to apply a lot of hot glue and hot glue each end to the back. And then that little strand is finished. So then I'm going to take my twine again, and I'm going to thread the rest of my beads on that and do the same thing. Yeah, there's 7 beads on top. Yeah, sorry, I was counting. There's 7 beads on top, so that means there must be 10 on this one because I'm pretty sure I painted 17 altogether. So again, I'm going to mix all the sizes, and then again, I'm testing it. Now, I'm not going at the like little indent directly below, but I'm skipping one. All right, so then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to tie the knots. Once I have all my beads on, I'm going to tie the knot, push it all the way down, cut off the other side. I think I add a bead here too because I felt like it needed it. I might have yeah, I think I did. So I'm going to add one more bead, and then I'm going to tie that knot, take it around back, and I'm going to hot glue them to the back of my tree. See, so you want them to hang, and if you do it too tight, they kind of like flap up a little bit. I hope that makes sense. It's like too tight and they don't hang nicely. So that's why I said you want to give it some slack on either side too. All right, so once that second strand was on, this first tree is done. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to pull a bunch of green beads, and I believe I don't know how many green beads I did because I mixed in some other beads as well. So I know I had 17 altogether. So regardless, 17. So after, okay, so I did 7 green beads, but I do know I go back and paint more of them because I wanted more. But I'm just giving this a coat of the Christmas tree, I think it's called Christmas Tree Green Paint from Apple Barrel, or Christmas Green, something like that. All right, next I'm going to take some of my 16 millimeter wood beads, and I'm going to put them on the skewer, and I'm going to faux stain these, And to do this, I'm again going to take a baby wipe and dip it in some Waverly Antique Wax, and then I'm just going to rub it all over my beads. So yeah, for this second tree, I wanted the variation of beads because I thought it would be a nice contrast to the plaid on the other tree. I loved how these came out. All right, so now I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to, oh wait, nope, I'm sorry. First, I'm going to put the green beads back on, and I'm going to add some Waverly Antique Wax on these to give it that rustic touch. I forgot. Of course, can't forget about that part. All right, now I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm just going to start stringing my beads. And again, this time I'm going to mix and match sizes and color. And if two of the colors were same color were next to each other, like you see two greens, that's okay. I was okay with that. I didn't want it to be so uniform and matchy and like alternating. So I just did whatever I, wanted to do. So as you can see, I only have 2 green beads left. So I do end up going back and painting more and adding them to my little stack of beads here. So then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to tie the knots and then hot glue this to the back of my tree. And I am going to do, that first little indent and then the third indent. So I want to know down in the comments, what colors do you decorate with for Christmas? Are you the traditional red, white, and green? Are you the blue and white, like more wintry? Are you the silvers, the golds, orange? No. What style or what colors do you decorate it with? This right here is the perfect example of what I decorate with. I do the reds, the greens, and the whites. However, it's not so bright. It's very rustic. So I do the naturals, like the antique or like the stained wood type of thing. So that's exactly how I decorate. It's more rustic, but I can't get away from the traditional. I love the red, white, and green. All right, so now I'm going to work on the second strand. I'm going to add all my beads on that, and I'm going to speed this up because you've already seen me do this several times. So then I'm going to tie my knots, and then I'm going to hot glue that to the back. And then after that's glued down, these trees are done. All right, here's the Kirklands. Like I said, they went with it says red and blue plaid wood. A set of 2 for $49.99. Kind of pricey, but you tell me, what do you think? For my fourth dupe, I'm going to use this gift bag from the Dollar Tree, and I absolutely fell in love with this. Again, it's that whole red truck. If you're a red truck lover, you're going to love this DIY. But the first thing I did was take out the little handles, and then I'm going to cut the front part of this bag off. So I only need one, like the front of it. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut that off. And I'm going to get as close to the edges as possible because I don't want like the fold, if that makes sense. And there are 2 holes because of the handles, but we're going to fix that in a little bit. So don't worry about that. All right, next I'm going to take my big paint sticks. And these are the big ones from Lowe's. And it will take 1 pack of 3. And I am measuring down because I need to build a frame for this. So I'm just placing my boards on and then just marking where I need it to go. Now, I did end up cutting these at an angle, so you're going to see me actually go back and kind of remeasure this. But for now, this is like a jumping off point. All right, so then I went to my miter box and saw, and like I said, cut it at an angle. So then I had to go back and actually remeasure. So what I did was the one that I had cut at an angle, I used that as a guide, and you can see I'm placing that over the bottom one, and then I'm just going to draw a slant, draw a line where to cut it, and then I'm going to flip it over to the other side and do the same thing. And then I'm going to do that going all the way around until I have all of them traced out. Then I cut all my pieces, and now I'm going to sand the edges to make them nice and smooth. This is actually my first time building a frame like this and cutting things at an angle. So I mean, that was the best method I could come up with how to make sure all my measurements were correct. And of course they were not, so I'm going to fix that too, but it is what it is. Then I'm going to clean up all my sanding stuff with my little ladybug vacuum. All right, so now I'm laying this out again. And this is where I realize there's kind of some gaps in between the corners, but that's okay. Like I said, we're going to fix that. So I'm just lining it all up. And I don't know how I did that because I measured, but that's okay. Everything can be fixed. And then once I had the frame positioned how I wanted, I am going to remove one of the pieces, add some hot glue to each end, and then I'm going to carefully stick it back in without moving the entire thing. And I'm going to do that going all the way around. I would maybe recommend using wood glue. I do not have any. I know I bought some. I can't find it. I don't know where my wood glue is, so I just decided to go with this, because as you can see, it kind of fell apart. But then, but at least some of it stuck together, so at least I had some of it glued. So, and then I realized that if I hold it together for a little bit, that it'll stick better. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to finish gluing it all back together. And like I said, I am going to apply some pressure there so that way it adheres. And it's pretty sturdy, I have to say. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Now to add more support, I did cut little pieces of craft stick, and I'm going to hot glue one to each corner, connecting the two pieces. So this really helped too to keep it together. Now I'm going to add my fourth one. And there we go. All right, so now to fix the gaps, I'm going to take some Dollar Tree spackling, and I'm just simply going to rub it in the gaps in between my corners. See, that was a big gap. I don't know how I did that. I promise I measured. You watched me do it. All right, so then once my spackling was dry, I'm going to sand that down so it's nice and smooth. So we can move on to the next step. So this was a really easy way to make a frame. I looked for a picture frame at the Dollar Tree, but I couldn't find one that was big enough for that gift bag. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to make it. All right, so now we're going to make this look like a window. So I'm going to use dowel rods for this. And all I did was stuck the dowel rod in the window and then measured it down. Then I'm going to use my miter shears to cut the dowel rod. Now, typically miter shears are great for this, but my blade is actually broken. So I'm doing my best here. You can see right there, my blade is broken. I need to buy a new blade. I just keep forgetting. So I'm going to cut 2 of those long ones down so they fit going up and down on the inside of my frame. And then after I break it off, I am sanding it down so it's nice and smooth. And then you're going to see that these slip right in, and they are nestled right in there. Like, they are tight. I don't think they're going anywhere. And if I had a little bit of wood kind of sticking out, I did use my little knife there to cut it off. And then those just went right in. So these are like, I guess you would call them the window panes. I think that's what they're called. And these are the ones going up and down. So now I'm trying to get it as straight as possible. Now we have to do the ones going across. So the easiest way I could think to do this was just to do 3 different pieces going across. So I already had like the piece left over from what I cut from the one going up and down. So I just went through, I measured as I went, and I just made sure that they were just, nudged right in the middle or where they needed to be. So now that one's in, and don't worry if they don't look lined up. I do go through and line them up. You can see that I'm using that other dowel rod just kind of as a guide so they're straight. And then I'm just going to go through and I'm going to cut. So you need 9 of these pieces all together, but you can't cut the same size. At least in mine, I couldn't because the 3 sections were not the same width. I hope this is all making sense. I know this kind of looks tedious, but I promise you the end result, was totally worth it. I loved the way that this one came out. Loved. All right, so like I said, I'm just going through, I'm cutting all my pieces, sanding them down, making sure that they are nice and smooth and that they wedge right in. And even if there's like a little tiny little gap, that's okay because I am going to end up hot gluing these in. So the hot glue will kind of fill that gap a little bit. So now I have, see, I couldn't just measure a bunch of those little pieces. I had to do it like piece by piece and just measure and cut, measure and cut. So this is tedious, so let's speed it up a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to go through and I'm going to finish cutting and sanding and measuring all of my pieces. So then after I got those side pieces done, I cut 2 for the middle. Then I'm going to fit those right in. Make sure that all of my pieces are straight up and down and straight across. And then, like I said, I'm going to take a little hot glue and I'm just going to dab. Now I'm going to flip this over and you can see how wedged in those pieces are because they're not even glued in yet and they didn't fall out. So, I mean, they're pretty tight in there. But I definitely wanted to go through and hot glue these in. And you can see I'm just putting a little hot glue, I'm just dabbing it a little bit. And I am going to go through. I wasn't going to, but I felt like it needed it. I did go through and do this on the front as well. But we're going to paint this, so you aren't even going to tell. Yeah. You're not going to be able to tell that it's hot glue. So now I'm going to go through. See, like I said, it kind of needed a little bit. The hot glue in the front. I can't wait till you guys see how this comes out. Oh my gosh. All right. So now that this window is all put together, it's time to paint it. So I'm just going to give it a good coat of Waverly chalk paint. Now, I did go through and give this 2 coats. I really wish I hadn't because when I went to sand it to distress it, it didn't really sand well because there were 2 coats. So for me personally, because I wanted to distress it, I should have just done 1 coat, but you can do whatever you want. I did make sure to get the dowel rods in there too, and then on one on the back. I flipped it on the back and painted it from behind as well. And then if any hot glue, I painted over that too. Because, I wanted that to blend in. So then once my window was dry, I took my sandpaper and like I said, I did sand it, but it was kind of hard. I really wanted the natural wood to come through, but because I put 2 coats on there, which like I said, I shouldn't have, I really had to apply a lot of pressure. But I did want to pay attention to the corners of my frame. So I'm just kind of randomly, I don't know, just sanding in one spot so it really came through. Then, of course, I got to take my chunky brush and dry brush some Waverly Antique Wax all over my sign. or my frame, and I am going to make sure to pay attention to the corners to make it look like they were chipped, and this is chipped wood. And I am going to do the window panes, of course. Then I'm going to sand it down to kind of help it all blend in. And then after it was distressed, it's time to add our gift bag again. But here's how I'm going to show you how I'm going to cover the holes. All I did was cut 2 little pieces of the snow part, and I just Mod Podged that behind the holes to kind of camouflage them. Now I will say, when this is standing up, you can see that there are 2 little pieces of papers behind there, but I think that, you know, I mean, oh well. It is what it is. This is just the only way I could think of to hide the holes. So then once I got my holes hidden, I went through and I hot glued this to the back of my frame. Now for this, I really had to watch the positioning because it says Happy Holidays up top, and I kept kind of cutting it off. So what I did was I laid it down, tacked it one corner down with hot glue, so that way I could flip it over and it wouldn't move. And then I used hot glue. I ran it all the way down each side and hot glued it down. So I actually got that tip from Liz Moore, and I saw her do it. I don't know if she purposely did it, like if it was intentional, but I was like, oh, that was pretty smart, because then she was able to flip it and it didn't move. All right, so next, I have this strand of lights, and they're actually ghosts, but you can't tell, and I really love the white lights in this. So I'm just going to go through and hot glue these little ghosts down all over my gift bag. And I try to cover all the area, like the whole surface, and then I'm going to hot glue the battery pack. Now, I always like to put it off to the side, and of course you want the little on-off facing up and the screw facing out. And after that, this sign is done. All right, so here is this one from Kirkland's, $49.99. This one's gorgeous, and it lights up too. But I have to say, I love mine. What do you think? Video a thumbs up if you love what you saw, and hey, be sure to check back for more Christmas decor ideas coming at you real soon. Well, until I see you again, I'll craft with you soon. Bye!